Because of a childhood betrothal, I was forced to marry a car mechanic. The car mechanic looks fierce, has a bad temper, is unambiguous, and only knows how to say that I'm too delicate and hard to support. I dislike him and prefer my foster brother, who treats me gently and considerately. But later, when my foster brother schemed to seize my family property and colluded with my best friend to kill me, only that car mechanic avenged me like a madman. His body was covered in blood and dirt. Yet when he approached my tombstone, he carefully wiped his hands clean and sneered, "You'll surely scold me for being filthy again." His eyes were red as he spoke. When I opened my eyes again, I was back on the day when I was quarreling and demanding a divorce from the car mechanic. In my ears were my best friend's words, subtly blaming that the car mechanic wasn't worthy of me and persuading me to go to my foster brother. I recorded it and immediately sent it to the car mechanic. "Someone is instigating and seducing your wife to cuckold you. Are you going to do something about it?" Lindsay Yu's boyfriend managed to invite a world top-renowned craftsman to specifically design that engagement ring. I heard it's the old master's swan song. She was clearly inferior to you in every way before, Cynthia said with a discontented tone, as if she was standing up for me. What era is it now? Arranged marriages are so outdated. You've been surrounded by nice things since you were a child, but in the end, you only got a plain band ring. That Tron clearly doesn't take you seriously. As she spoke, she tried to pull me, her tone getting more excited. By the way, Saria, Aiden is coming back to the country. If he sees you suffering such grievances, he'll be so heartbroken. Listening to Cynthia's complaints, I dodged her outstretched hand. Saria? Cynthia looked astonished. I lowered my head, looking at my phone, pretending to be aggrieved. So what do you think I should do? A flash of pride quickly passed through Cynthia's eyes. Aiden will definitely help you when he's back. In my opinion, Saria, you might as well take this opportunity to divorce that guy. After all, Aiden is there for you. The Aiden she mentioned was my foster brother. Aiden. He was also the one who killed me in my past life. In my past life, I listened to Cynthia's words, and on this very day, I quarreled and demanded a divorce from Trong. I also lost my temper and ran away from home, causing Trong, who came out to look for me, to be framed by Aiden in a car accident and become a cripple ever since. It was from that day on that Trong became completely cold towards me. It was only after I died in my past life that I learned that Trong, misled by Cynthia's ambiguous words, thought I was the one who instigated the whole thing. Yet in the end, only he avenged me regardless of everything. I couldn't help but feel dazed. And Cynthia was still probing. What are you thinking? I remained silent. But my expression visibly wavered. So she let out a sigh of relief and smiled again. Anyway, head in fulfillment session. I'll support you no matter what you do. Pretending to be a good best friend. I smiled gratefully at Cynthia, then turned around and sent the recording to my grandpa and Trong. After thinking for a while, I asked Trong, "Someone is instigating and seducing your wife to cuckold you. Are you going to do something about it?" Trong is a car mechanic who in every aspect is unworthy of me. But due to the childhood betrothal, hilariously agreed upon by the elders when they were drunk, I married Trong. Naturally, heading so feldland sexually, I was dissatisfied. Especially since Trong looks fierce, has a bad temper and is unambiguous. Every time, he would click his tongue, look at me with a frown and say unhappily, "You're so delicate. You're really hard to support." It made me so angry that I wanted to hit him. So after getting married, I didn't allow Trong to touch me and kept asking for a divorce. But Trong, who usually has a bad temper, endured it all. I originally thought he was eyeing my family's money. But now, looking at the chat interface where I didn't get a reply for a long time, I couldn't wait to see Trong. Thinking of everything I saw following Trong after I died in my past life, I snorted. He was clearly head over heels in love with me. But my eyes couldn't help getting red. With a dull pain in my heart. Trong lives in a small rental house next to the auto repair shop, because we had a fight. And I was so angry that I drove him away. All the way, I had thought about how to apologize to Trong later and how to treat him well in the future. Until I couldn't get through to Trong's phone and almost got soaked outside the auto repair shop. Are you crazy to come here in the rain to quarrel with me? Trong rushed out. Furious. He stuffed the umbrella into my hand, forcefully wrapped me in his coat, and without saying a word, picked me up horizontally. This guy says whatever comes to his mind when he's angry. I held back, but couldn't help it. You're the crazy one. But I nestled in his arms and didn't move. My nostrils were filled with the intertwined smell of tobacco and gasoline on Trong. If it were before, I would have shouted at Trong to put me down. But this time, I just endured the discomfort and shrank deeper into Trong's arms. His body suddenly stiffened. Trong's rental house is small and shabby. After putting me down, he realized he had taken the wrong coat. He couldn't help but scratch his hair in annoyance. And he took out a new coat and put it on the bed, saying in a harsh tone, "Go take a bath." Trong was only wearing a white vest, which was already wet and stuck tightly to his body, outlining the contours of his strong muscles. But it was already autumn. I felt a bit guilty and dared not look at him. I tightened the coat on my body. You go first. Apart from getting wet at the beginning, I was actually okay. What's more, later Trong forcefully used the umbrella to cover only me, getting completely drenched himself. Trong was silent. After a long while, he laughed meaningfully. What are you up to this time? Trying to divorce me again? Planning to use the excuse that I didn't take good care of you because you got sick? I suddenly raised my head and met Trong's expressionless face. His facial features are extremely good-looking. But somehow, when combined, he looks like a gang leader. I'm actually a bit afraid of him. And now I opened my mouth, but couldn't say a single word in my defense. Because this is indeed something I would do. Seeing that I was quiet, Trong tugged at the corner of his mouth. Finally, heading to fell Wyatt sigh. As if he had compromised, he closed his eyes and said, "Fine. You go take a bath first. You're a pampered person. If you really get sick, it'll be others who get tired and annoyed. Don't worry about the divorce. If you really don't like me," heading fulfilled land sigh, "I won't force you to stay. There's no need to suffer like this." No, Ethan fulfilled my incession. It's not like that. Seeing that Trong was about to turn around, I hastily reached out and grabbed his arm, not caring that the coat on me fell off. Let's take a bath together. It's just a bath. Why bring up divorce? These words blurted out of my mouth. I didn't consider at all how ambiguous they would sound. When I realized it, Trong's surprised and somewhat bold gaze fell on me. I belatedly wrapped the coat around me again, unable to hold back my temper. I glared at him. "Don't look." Trong let out a low laugh, but the smile disappeared quickly. He turned around and said casually, "You've really grown up, young lady. Now you're even using the beauty trap to force me to divorce." I could hear the sarcasm in his tone. But indeed, I was in the wrong first. So I held back my usual spoiled temper, took out my phone and played the recording. Cynthia's words clearly rang out in the rental house. I noticed that Trong's body, which was facing away from me, suddenly stiffened. The hand hanging by his side unconsciously clenched into a fist and then quietly loosened. "All right. I know what someone is instigating and seducing your wife to cuckold you. Are you going to do something about it?" The next second, the voice message I sent to Trong earlier interrupted what he was going to say. He turned around in surprise, as if he couldn't believe it. This was the first time I admitted that I was Trong's wife. I said a grieved lie. "Trong, what? Did you not even look at my message?" Trong didn't say anything, just scratched his nose uncomfortably. So I said even more aggrieved lie. "So if I say I won't divorce you anymore, will you not believe me either?" My voice vaguely carried an unconscious sob. Trong turned his head to look at me. His gaze was deep, with emotions I couldn't understand, but he seemed to have acquiesced. Trong didn't believe me. This was actually within my expectations. After all, after getting married, my actions made him think that I hated and despised him. Even though I didn't really hate him that much. I just wanted to use it as an excuse to divorce. But in fact, after truly feeling Trong's distrust, I was still very sad. And I knew I shouldn't be sad. This was what I deserved. So I subconsciously hugged his arm and said sullenly, I really won't divorce you this time. I was wrong before. I'll treat you well in the future. I had never said such words before. Now that I was being so straightforward, I couldn't help but blush and close my eyes. Taking a deep breath, I just said everything out. Believe me. But Trong didn't pull his hand away. Nor did he respond to me. I was a bit anxious. Just as I was about to continue, my phone rang. Without looking, I wanted to hang up, but Trong answered it. He said, "What if it's something important?" But the next second, Aiden's gentle voice came through. "Sorry, I'm back in the country. Don't worry. I'll help you deal with that man." So I saw Ron's somewhat softened expression suddenly turn cold again. My heart sank. Aiden was about to say something else, but I interrupted him urgently. "You misunderstood. I don't need you to help me deal with anything." I looking at Tron's half-smiling, half-mocking gaze. I gritted my teeth and said, "I've fallen in love with Trong. In this life, I won't marry anyone else except him. I won't divorce. Only death can part us." I don't know why, but after saying these words, I felt a huge weight lifted off my heart. I hung up Aiden's call, and what greeted me was a short-sleeved shirt thrown by Trong. "All right." His voice was hoarse. I couldn't see the expression on his face. "Go take a bath first." I was driven to the bathroom. The narrow bathroom still had the lingering fragrance of shower gel. Trong must have been taking a bath before. So, my mind, which was originally full of thoughts on how to make Trong believe me, was instantly muddled by the heat. Some overly ambiguous memories suddenly flooded back. After I was killed by Cynthia and Aiden in my past life, I didn't disappear immediately. But for some reason, I could only follow around Trong. So I watched him avenge me. And I watched him in my shower room, leaning against the wall, whispering my name over and over again. His voice was hoarse, and his expression was one of restraint. After a long time, the water washed everything away. Now all these memories came back to me clearly. My body stiffened. I felt uncomfortable all over and couldn't help but mutter a few curses at Trong. I originally wanted to take a bath to calm down. But Trong. What? The man's lazy voice immediately sounded. "It's not far. This rental house isn't big to begin with." I paused for a moment, then finally whispered, "The shower head is broken." There was a moment of silence. The doorknob turned slightly, but then suddenly stopped. "Sorry, Trong's tone was calm. "My self-control isn't that strong. Especially after what you said earlier. I can take it as you agreeing." My dazed mind started to turn slowly. I belatedly remembered that when I had strongly resisted Trong's approach before, I had warned him that he could only touch me after getting my consent. At that time, Trong urgently needed money for his mother's medical treatment and agreed. So except for the day of our marriage, Trong had never touched me since then. After he said that, he stopped his actions. It seemed that he was patiently waiting for my response. The feeling of wet clothes sticking to my body was really uncomfortable. I looked down at the little white dress I had specially put on for going out today. It had become semi-transparent after getting wet, and I hesitated. This guy was very strong and fierce. It had been very painful that time. And I was very afraid of pain. Probably because I was silent for too long. Trong simply let go of the doorknob. "I've sent a message for someone to come and pick you up. The towel is new. When you get there, dry yourself and change your clothes. Then leave. Just prepare the divorce agreement and send it to me. I'll talk to the old man. But Aiden really isn't a good choice for you. You can't handle him." His voice was calm, without any discernible emotion. But for some reason, it made me angry. He was talking about divorce again. Obviously, having fulfilled my say. This guy had been reluctant to divorce before. So before I realized it, I had already yanked open the bathroom door. I looked at Trong provocatively and fiercely, saying, "If I can handle you, why can't I handle Aiden? If you're really a man, shut up and come in." Trong didn't say anything, but the look in his eyes as he looked at me grew darker. And he suddenly laughed. Meaningfully, he said, "Indeed. If you can handle me, Aiden's build is clearly not as good as mine." My face instantly stiffened. The temperature in the bathroom was very high. The hand protecting the back of my head was even scalding hot. Only the cold tiles made me shiver involuntarily. So a barely audible sigh escaped. Trong's voice was hoarse. "You're so delicate." The next second, I was leaning against his arms. The originally broken shower head was turned on. And the gradually warming water fell again. I heard Trong chuckle. Knowing that he must have misunderstood that I was making excuses before. But now I could only tightly hold onto his shoulders. "Trong!" I exclaimed in a low voice. And the feeling of weightlessness made me hug his head tightly. Trong lazily reminded. The sound insulation in this house isn't very good. So I was so scared that I closed my mouth and unconsciously hugged Trong tighter. "Not bad. You're not sick. You're quite strong." Trong smiled. "Hold on tighter." I didn't understand what Trong meant by this. Until he held me with one hand and suddenly pressed my head down with the other hand, which was holding the back of my head. A wave of he instantly swept through my brain. I was like a small boat being carried forward by the waves in the vast ocean. There was no chance of escape. It was still the same as before. Fierce and intense. The burning breath made my head dizzy. And I unconsciously tugged at Trong's hair. But it only made him more forceful. No, something was wrong. I really seemed to be getting dizzy. I wanted to push Trong away. But my hands and feet were weak. Finally, heading to Feldmeier. I only vaguely heard this guy curse in a low voice. "Damn it. Did I really kiss you dizzy?" Nonsense. It was clearly because it was too hot in the bathroom. I wanted to refute. But I passed out. I had a fever. Trong took the blame for me. The butler who had always doted on me was complaining in a low voice about Trong. Trong was getting impatient. Until I woke up. The first thing I did was to shakily but stubbornly grab Trong's arm. "Kiss me again." I wanted to prove my innocence. I wasn't the one who got kissed dizzy. Trong clicked his tongue. The butler grandpa looked at me in shock. His left face seemed to say, "Lust crazed." And his right face seemed to say, "Desperate for love." I lowered my head in shame. But didn't let go. Finally, heading to Feldmeier. Trong grabbed my hand and pressed it against his chest a few times. His tongue carrying a faint smile. "Just touch a few times. First. Get your body well." The butler's disapproval in his eyes became even stronger. I glared at Trong angrily and annoyed. As a result, this guy turned his head to complain. "She's making eyes at me. You should do something about it. You know, I'm young and can't resist usually." These were the words the butler grandpa had used to scold Trong before. His old face stiffened slightly. "Miss." I had a blank expression. But my hand exerted force. Trong laughed. And his tone seemed a bit off. "Seems like you have a good appetite. Do you want to eat something?" The old butler quickly asked someone to bring up some porridge. But I knew Trong didn't mean that. The hand still on his chest stiffened. And my face felt a bit hot. Dirty old man. I gritted my teeth in anger. But somehow felt at ease. Fortunately, nothing had happened yet. Probably because I was reborn and had things on my mind. This illness came on fiercely. And I had a high fever for several days that wouldn't go down. Trong stayed to take care of me. "You're really a handful." Trong frowned and picked me up with one hand. "Open your mouth and take your medicine." I looked at the dark circles under Trong's eyes and silently took the medicine in one gulp. His suspicious gaze fell on me. Finally, heading for Feldmeier, he laughed. "All right. The little one has grown up. I'm delicate and don't like bitter things. Every time I take medicine, I throw a tantrum and need someone to coax me. Trong doesn't know how to coax people." This was one of the things I used to dislike about him. But now, thinking that this person had taken care of me without rest for several days, I felt a bit guilty. "Maybe you should take a nap?" Trong raised his eyebrows and looked at me. "Sleep? Yeah. All right." Without saying another word, he lifted the quilt next to me and lay down. My waist tightened. My face stiffened slightly. And I subconsciously tried to push Trong away. But it wasn't because of this excessive intimacy. "Go take a bath. I know you're clean. I scrub myself thoroughly inside and out before entering your room every time." Trong closed his eyes. His tone lazy. His other hand naturally patted my waist. His voice was sleepy. "Don't move. I'm really going to sleep." so I didn't dare to move. But not long after. Trong. I was angry and ashamed. Didn't you say you were sleepy? This guy didn't even open his eyes. I can't help it. Don't worry. I'll be fine in a while. He was so self-assured. I had to turn around and face away from Trong, closing my eyes angrily. But until I fell asleep, Trong didn't keep his promise. In a daze, I vaguely felt my hand being held. The man chuckled, "TSK. You're such a wimp." I was woken up by Cynthia's sobbing voice. Seeing that I woke up, she immediately pounced on me. Her eyes red. "Sorry, you really scared me this time." Aiden, whom I hadn't seen for a long time, was also standing beside her. Frowning, "Why have you lost so much weight?" His tone carried a hint of dissatisfaction. If it was before, I would definitely pour out my grievances in front of these two people I was very close to without hesitation. But now, seeing them, I could only think of the scenes from my past life when I was imprisoned and by Aiden and forced to be his hidden lover. And finally tortured by Cynthia out of jealousy. So I simply closed my eyes and said coldly, "I'm fine. But you're disturbing my rest." I was thinking about what I should do. The recording I sent to Grandpa last time made him a bit dissatisfied with Aiden. But not to the point of being vigilant. After all, this guy was very good at pretending, and was raised by Grandpa. So, what should I do to make Grandpa see Aiden's true nature? As I was thinking, I heard Aiden sigh. He skillfully reached out to touch my head, his tone doting. "Are you complaining that your brother came back late?" I instantly stiffened and dodged, with a conditioned reflexive physical disgust. "Don't touch me." My movement was a bit big, revealing a red mark on the collar. Aiden noticed it. He almost couldn't maintain his gentle expression. And his tone suddenly became cold. "Did he hurt you?" Cynthia also reacted. A flash of jealousy passed through her eyes as she looked at me. I turned my head away and didn't see it. But my face turned cold. "Get out. I've always been such a spoiled and temperamental person. Especially when I'm sick." These two people didn't notice anything wrong. Aiden coaxed me a few times and then left, but Cynthia stayed brazenly. She bit her lower lip and suddenly asked me before I could drive her out, "Sorry, I heard that you were made to pass out by Tron this time? Is he really that good?" Her eyes were evasive, with a hint of barely noticeable shyness. This statement was very strange. I looked at Cynthia, and then saw her quickly frown and complain. "This is coercion. He clearly knows that you don't like him touching you. Yet he made you pretend to faint to avoid it." I pretended to faint. "What are you hiding from me? Don't I know your personality?" Cynthia smiled and gave me a coquettish look. When she got closer, she said in a tone that seemed to understand me very well, "In high school, because brother Aiden said he wanted to see you get the first place. Even though you had your period and a fever, you still stubbornly ran the 800-meter race and didn't pass out. Now, could you really pass out just because of a trauma? But speaking of which, you really have suffered for brother Aiden." This person rambled on non-stop. I became subconsciously vigilant. In my past life, Cynthia finally married Aiden. I always thought she liked Aiden. But now. So I quietly followed Cynthia's words, trying to find out more about her feelings for Trong. But I didn't notice that Aiden didn't close the door when he left. There was only one thought in my mind. Good grief. This little schemer has set her sights on my man. I was so angry that my chest felt tight. Even deliberately picking on her and making Cynthia cry and leave didn't ease my anger. I was only thinking that when Tron came back, I must warn him to stay away from Cynthia. Especially, he had to dress properly. Not even a single bit could be seen by that little schemer. But I waited for a long time. I didn't see Tron come into my room as usual, act shamelessly, and hug me to sleep. I asked the servant. But I was told that Tron had returned to the rental house. The young master said he also had a fever and couldn't infect you. He had a fever? While I was worried, I also felt something was wrong. This guy was full of energy last night. But even the butler Grandpa said that went wrong left. His face was clearly abnormally red. So I suppressed that feeling of something being wrong. Instead, I felt a bit excited. I was going to take care of the sick Tron. Trong didn't stay obediently in the rental house. When I found him, he was squatting in front of a car tire, a cigarette in his mouth, using a wrench to take something apart. Beside him stood a curvy beauty with wavy hair. I didn't know what Trong said, but the woman covered her mouth and giggled. Alarm bells went off in my mind, especially when I walked over. The woman glanced at me. As she left, she made a phone call gesture to Trong and said, "Let's keep in touch later." Trong nodded casually. I called out to him angrily, "Trong." Then, let out a low sigh, as if he had just noticed me. He drawled in response, "Why are you here?" His voice was hoarse with a bit of a nasal tone. Only then did I remember that he was running a fever, and my heart instantly softened. "You have a fever. Why aren't you resting at home?" Trong let out an "oh," lowered his head, and continued his work without looking at me. He laughed again and said, "I have to work and save money. Otherwise, a certain young lady might say, I'm good for nothing and can't even support my own wife in the future." I had blurted out these words in a fit of anger before, because I thought Trong was unambitious and not comparable to Aiden, who was my grandpa's right-hand man. That now I squatted beside Trong and said earnestly, "Then I'll support you." After all, I felt grateful and guilty towards Trong. Trong's hand froze, and the screw in his hand fell. I picked it up and handed it to him, adding, "If you really like fixing cars, I won't stop you. Anyway, hadn't fulfilled my obsession. My family is quite wealthy, and supporting you is no big deal." Although I knew that Trong would later build a successful career on his own and even avenge my family, I could tell that he didn't like the false pretenses in the business world. However, to my surprise, after hearing my heartfelt words, the expression on Trong's face turned solemn. After a long while, he sneered and said, "Then I'd really be a gigolo." "No. It's not," I instinctively wanted to explain, but was interrupted by Trong. "Thank you, Miss Saria, for your kindness. But if you really want to repay me for taking care of you these days, just give me a sum of money." There was something very wrong with these words. I frowned. The next second, my phone rang. It was Grandpa. "Xiaomian." Grandpa's voice on the other end of the phone was imposing, with a barely noticeable hint of compromise. "I agree to your divorce from Trong." My eyes widened in surprise, but I met Trong's calm and unsurprised gaze. Grandpa said that he didn't expect me to be so resistant to Trong. "Since you've been together for a while, and still can't bring yourself to like this kid, and even want Aiden to help you, then get a divorce." Grandpa's tone was decisive, just like when he insisted on me marrying Trong for his own face. "However, Trong's mother is about to have an operation. After she passes the critical period, you two can go and get divorced. It'll save you both from torturing each other." "No, Yoshai. Grandpa." I was in a hurry to say something, but Grandpa didn't listen to my explanation. He said he had something else to do and hung up the phone. I even heard Aiden's voice. He must have said something to Grandpa. This is completely different from my past life. In my past life, Grandpa never agreed to my divorce from Trong until I died. Did everything change after I was reborn? Holding my phone, I suddenly felt at a loss. But more than that, there was a panicked feeling as if my heart was being squeezed tightly. Would Aiden and Cynthia's conspiracy be advanced because of this? "Are you so happy you're down?" Trong got up to wash his hands, then wiped them casually on his clothes. He gently but forcefully pried my hand open. Then, let out a low sigh. Frowning at my broken fingernail, he said, "So much strength?" "Trong." It took me a long time to find my voice. I asked him, "Did you say something to Grandpa?" I didn't believe Trong had done nothing in this. He didn't deny it and instead asked me, "Isn't this what you've always wanted?" But I clearly said I wouldn't divorce him. I also said I'd treat him well in the future. How could this person not remember anything? I stared at Trong, my nose feeling sour. An inexplicable sense of grievance welled up. "You should tone down your young lady temper in the future." Trong seemed not to notice my abnormal emotions and continued on his own. "Not many men can put up with it." "So you can't put up with it either?" Trong was taken aback. He neither said yes nor no, just raised an eyebrow and said, come to think of it. It's me who's holding you back. TSK. I should have endured more and not touched you before. He said the last sentence very softly, as if talking to himself. But I heard it. So the feeling of grievance became even stronger, tinged with an unconscious annoyance. I grabbed Trong's arm and said, "Come back with me." "That's not a good idea." Trong didn't move and instead tried to persuade me. "If the person you like sees this, he'll be unhappy." His voice dragged on at the end, with obvious deliberation. But I didn't notice anything. I just viciously told the bodyguards who followed to carry Trong back. He didn't resist either. He just said to me, "Forced love is never sweet. Forced love really isn't sweet." Trong was forcefully tied to the bed by me, even though there was a lot of commotion downstairs. The way he looked at me remained calm. He used his old words to stop me again. "It's a normal physiological phenomenon. I can't control it." I also took Trong's phone. That night, the woman really called. Her name was Ella. As her name suggested, she was a bright and beautiful woman like Lin Siyu. Somehow, I remembered that the girl had always laughed at my underdevelopment before. I could retort back then. But now, after thinking about it, I shyly put on a sexy nightgown and went to see Trong. But Trong just grabbed my fidgeting hand. His voice was low and sounded fierce. "Don't touch randomly." It was completely different from the way he couldn't wait for me to stick to him before. He really looks scary when he has a straight face. I was so angry that my heart sank. But I couldn't really keep Trong imprisoned, because his mother was still in the hospital. I accompanied Trong to the hospital to take care of her. Only in front of his mother would Trong act the same as before. But after returning to the villa, he became cold again. I felt that I must have owed a debt in my past life, and I had to pay it back to Trong in this life. But after the only time I took the initiative to kiss Trong and was dodged, I couldn't do more. Grandpa was determined to make me divorce Trong again. Even after I refused, he rebuked me unhappily. "Isn't this what you've always wanted? You want it one moment and don't want it the next. What do you take Trong for?" Aiden also looked at me helplessly from the side, as if tolerating a naughty child. "Sorry, isn't it good to come back to me?" I just found him disgusting. But I had no choice. Because Grandpa didn't believe Aiden would betray him. He had always been so stubborn. Especially since I couldn't produce strong evidence. I thought for the first time that what Trong said about me before was right. I was indeed spoiled. Without the title of Miss Saria, I was nothing. So that night, I went back and released Trong. I also gave him a large sum of money, thinking that anyway, I was definitely going to repay wrong. Since he didn't like me anymore, I'd give him money so he could buy the good life. It was just as well not to get involved in these troubles. It had nothing to do with him originally. I comforted myself, forcefully ignoring the indescribable sadness in my heart. And Trong looked down at the card, the emotions in his eyes obscure. He asked me, "Have you really thought it through? What does it matter if I have or haven't?" I glared at him, my tone involuntarily sour. "Anyway, you've changed your taste and have someone else you like, right? Don't think I don't know he's still in touch with that Ella. Men are really fickle. They get bored quickly as soon as you treat them a little better." I was so angry that my chest felt stuffy. And I didn't want to admit at all that I had actually fallen for Trong. "Fine." Trong's tone was casual. But his eyes were as sharp as a hawk, staring closely at me. "Just don't regret it, young lady." I didn't look at him. Just turned my head away and said, "Get out." Trong really left. He left without a trace of reluctance. After the initial sadness and discomfort, I quickly threw myself into new studies. Since I was reborn, I've been deliberately getting in touch with business matters. Grandpa didn't ask much. Just had his people take me along. But the businesswoman ability I imagined and didn't show up. I really lacked the talent in this regard. Even Lin Siyu, who had always been at odds with me, couldn't help but come and persuade me. "There's really no need. The Sarioff family really won't end up relying on you to hold up the sky." After learning from Aiden that Trong was determined to divorce me, Cynthia took the opportunity to get close to Trong. Fortunately, having fulfilled the people I sent managed to get a lot of evidence of her deliberately seducing Trong. We weren't divorced yet. And Trong was still my husband in name. I had someone release these evidences. Pretended to be crazy with the stimulation of being betrayed. And slapped Cynthia a few times. I also took the opportunity to bite off some project compensation from the Cynthia family. But Lindsay, you found out about this. The private detective you hired happens to know my fiancé. She came to me at that time and handed me an envelope. You're still young. You didn't handle the aftermath well. I knew she meant well. So I endured my discomfort and thanked her. As a result, Lindsay, you got excited. After coming and going, my relationship with her actually improved a lot. To be honest, Lindsay, you and I didn't have any major conflicts. Even in my past life. After the Sarioff family fell, only Lindsay Yu was willing to help me. Although Aiden stopped her. It was also with Lindsay Yu's advice that I learned there were so many ways to deal with Cynthia. Politely speaking, you're too proud to do those underhanded things. Bluntly speaking, you're being sanctimonious. She snorted, folding her arms. If you're willing to lower your stance a bit, what can't you accomplish? I always felt she was implying something. Cynthia really didn't have an easy time. She was originally a bastard daughter of the Cynthia family. Only because of her good relationship with me did she have some status in the Cynthia family. Why get your hands dirty when dealing with her? Lindsay, you said it in a casual manner. I seemed to have an epiphany. Before long, there came the scandal that Cynthia was having an affair with her brother-in-law. I knew Cynthia had always hated her sister. So I just gave her sister a veiled reminder. I really didn't expect Cynthia to seduce even an old man. She was really desperate. And indeed, I didn't need to get my hands dirty. Her sister found quite a few people. Cynthia went completely crazy and was sent to a mental hospital. I just told the people to take good care of her. Just like what she did to me in my past life. I was grateful to Lindsay Yu. So after she said those words, I couldn't help but feel a bit sad. But before I could be sad for long, I heard her suddenly approach me. Her eyes sparkled. And she said in a very gossipy tone, I heard your ex-husband is quite capable. He even hooked up with the female CEO of the M Group before getting divorced. May I ask, as the one who was jilted, what do you think about this? Miss Saria. I was stunned. Then the discomfort that I had deliberately ignored before welled up again. I deliberately didn't inquire about Trong's affairs. I only knew that he had quit his job at the auto repair shop. I had no idea what he did or who he met. I just occasionally accompanied Trong to the hospital to visit his mother as required. Other than that, the two of us were like the closest parallel lines. I saw Rong again at a business banquet. The man who always wore vests and shorts changed into a proper suit, making him look more imposing. The gazes of many ladies and young misses fell on Trong. But when they saw the woman beside him, those amazed looks quickly turned into a sense of watching a show. Some even looked at me brazenly. Trong came with Ella. And Ella was the female CEO that Lindsay Yu mentioned. Lost. After carefully sizing up Ella, Lindsay Yu sighed beside me. Completely lost in terms of dimensions. But it doesn't matter. This can be cultivated in a couple of days. I'll take you to hire some male models later. Trong and Ella were not far away. And Lindsay Yu didn't lower her voice. As soon as she finished speaking, I noticed that Trong seemed to glance in my direction. Immediately, I felt guilty and dragged Lindsay Yu away. Lindsay Yu clicked her tongue. What are you afraid of? He's openly out with his new love. Can't you hire a few male models? I couldn't very well say that I was intimidated and felt guilty because of Trong's terrifying look just now. Could I? I could only vaguely find an excuse to prevaricate. Lindsay Yu was about to say something else. But her fiancé came and took her away. Seeing Aiden smiling and walking towards me, I quickly turned around. As a result, I saw Ron carefully protecting Ella to avoid a cart. I felt annoyed. I took a deep breath, pulled my attention back, and got down to business. I couldn't help but think that when I became a female CEO in the future, I'd also hire a few male models. I'd find ones like Trong and show them in front of him to piss him off. This banquet was a trial for me by Grandpa, as the future heir of the Sarioff family. To be honest, when Grandpa made this decision, I was shocked. This was another thing different from my past life. Aiden almost couldn't maintain his expression at that time. But he recovered quickly, with a proper smile on his face. Congratulations. Sorry, but you'll have a greater responsibility in the future and can't be as willful as before. So I suspected that Grandpa had actually listened to my reminder before. But he refused to admit it and even put Aiden in charge of a major project. I could only suppress these confusions and study harder. Then came this trial. I cheered up and greeted several uncles from families on good terms with the Saria family. And also focused on socializing with some new talents. Unconsciously, I drank more wine. When I became a little more sober, I was taken to the balcony by Trong. My brain, numbed by alcohol, couldn't quite function. I looked up at him blankly. Why are we here? Trong clicked his tongue. He irritably tore off his tie and asked me. Didn't you see that bastard's hand was about to touch your waist? Really? I tried to recall carefully. I only remembered that when that person got a little closer to me, I was pulled out by Trong. Wait, Trong? I belatedly got angry and glared at him. What does it have to do with you? Anyway, you're taking care of someone else. I didn't say this out loud. I still had some pride. Trong was amused by my anger. He was probably really hot, so he simply took off his suit jacket. So my eyes naturally fell on his arm. The black armband was extremely obvious, outlining the tight muscle lines of his arm. It was quite alluring. But since he was wearing an armband, my eyes involuntarily moved slowly down and landed on the side of Trong's thigh. I'm wearing shirt clips. Trong said it in an extremely natural tone. He raised his eyebrows and looked at me. Wanna see? I nodded without thinking, but quickly reacted and said expressionlessly, does President Tella like this? Otherwise, with Trong's rough personality, how would he know so much? Trong had a cigarette in his mouth. It wasn't lit. He smiled. Jealous? I didn't say anything. And my gaze at him became more and more fierce. Finally, heading to Feldmay, sorry. I just warned him. We're not divorced yet. Trong. You'd better behave. I don't want to be laughed at so blatantly. So are you jealous? Trong bent down, his eyes staring straight at me. But before I could answer, he clicked his tongue again. Sorry, he called me. You're making my brother wake up. Me? Are you out of your mind? I was angry and annoyed, but my eyes unconsciously turned red. I had done so much before. But this guy still looked so cold. Now he came to me and said these things. Was he really treating me like a fool? So the pent-up grievances welled up instantly. And my vision gradually blurred. Trump probably didn't expect me to react so strongly. He hurriedly apologized to me in a low voice. As a result, the moment his attitude softened, my tears couldn't be controlled. You're really my ancestor. Trong gritted his teeth. In the end, he had no choice but to pick me up and make me sit sideways on his lap. I exclaimed in a low voice. Then the alcohol was instantly scared away. I subconsciously looked around in a panic, afraid that someone would pop up and see. Fortunately, hemming fulfilledly, there was no one. There was also a curtain on the balcony, and people inside couldn't see outside. I heaved a sigh of relief and was about to get angry. But then my hand was guided to touch Trong's chest. He tilted his head slightly and kissed away the tears on my face bit by bit. I stiffened and didn't dare to move. Finally, petting fulfilledly, I gritted my teeth in anger. Are you a dog, Trong? Woof. He shamelessly barked right next to my ear. Then said with enthusiasm, should I get you a chain? I was so angry that I lost my temper. I said sarcastically, aren't you afraid President Tella will dump you if she sees this? I coldly tried to get down, but was pressed back by Trong. He sighed, his tone helpless. Ancestor. She's my sister. My real sister. The kind in the same household registration book. I was stunned and turned my head to look at him stiffly. And I saw him naturally take out the household registration book, flip to a page, and point it to me. Come on. Who the hell carries a household registration book with them when they go out? I suspected Trong had planned this. My socializing wasn't over yet. Aiden was held up by Ella and didn't have time to come to me. I left the banquet first. Before long, Trong sneaked into my car like a thief. No one said a word along the way. Until we entered the apartment. Clothes were scattered all the way from the door to the sofa. I felt like all the air in my lungs was being snatched away by this guy. I was about to kick him. But was held by Trong. He knelt down on one knee in front of me. His breath hot. Trong! I exclaimed. Angrily and annoyed. Pushing him. Go take a bath. It's okay. I don't mind. Trong's voice was sticky. So you don't have to waste your energy kicking later. I endured my weak waist and shouted. I mind you. Trong's movement paused. He still went to take a bath. But Trong didn't take off his armband and shirt clips. They were really good looking. He mumbled. Anyway. I'll have to take a bath again later. It's a waste of effort. Shut up. I thought Trong was lying. It clearly didn't take that long in my past life. I gritted my teeth. That's enough. How can it be enough? Trong kissed my red-rimmed tail and suddenly said. Miss Sariat is a heroic woman who could grit her teeth and finish running 800 meters without passing out even when she was having her period and had a fever. How could this little thing trouble you? His tone was fierce. So were his actions. But this sentence sounded familiar. I vaguely remembered when I first heard this sentence. And also vaguely remembered Trong's strangeness that day. So I suddenly realized and tugged at his hair. You eavesdropped that day? They wanted me to hear it. How could I refuse? Trong forcefully held my hand. And finally our fingers intertwined. He smiled and rubbed his nose against mine to coax me. Ancestor. Stop glaring. Go away. I was woken up by a recording. You said Saria is the head of the family. Ancestor. You've always been the head of the family. Say Saria. Saria is the head of the family. Say it again. Trong likes Saria. A long silence. The man chuckled. Do I really have to say it? Say it. Trong likes Saria. The first time I saw her, I wanted her to be the only one who could sleep in Trong's bed for the rest of her life. It was rather reserved, compared to what he said in my ear last night. This sentence from Trong was indeed more reserved. Okay. Can I touch you now? Touch where? There was a rustling sound. Before long, my drunken cry rang out, Male mommy. You like this? Male mommy. Damn, let out a low sigh. Ancestor. Bite lighter. The following sounds were too explicit to hear. Leslie covered my head with the quilt, trying to pretend nothing had happened. But was mercilessly uncovered by Trong. He smiled meaningfully. Does your knee still hurt? It was a double entendre. At first, I still couldn't get used to Trong's departure. After all, he was really good at taking care of people. So I forced myself to learn women's self-defense. But this thing really hurt. Plus, I saw Ella and Trong going to the hospital together. I couldn't resist and, egged on by Lin Siu, drank a bit more to vent. But I didn't have the guts to drink outside. My knees were hurting so badly at that time. And I was crying hard too. Later, I was vaguely picked up and coaxed for a long time. I thought I was dreaming. But I didn't expect Trong to really come. He even recorded it. Delete it. I made a surprise move to grab Trong's phone. But he took the opportunity to hold me in his arms. I gritted my teeth in anger. Trong held me with one hand and pressed me down slightly, raising his eyebrows. Should we also delete the part where Saria said she's the head of the family? I froze. All right. Trong kissed my blushing face amusedly. I know you care about your face. I was going to delete it anyway. I snorted, not believing him. After all, this guy can even deceive a ghost. I'm not lying to you. Trong saw through my thoughts at a glance and smiled meaningfully. Who knew that a certain lecher would even peek when someone is taking a bath? Who peeked? I stopped halfway through my words. I slowly opened my eyes wide and looked at Trong in disbelief. A bold guess came to my mind. So now, can you listen to me properly? Trong was also reborn. But later than me. After I found out that I wasn't lame, I guessed that something must have changed. Trong truly lives up to being someone who is contented with Aiden. He could easily find the tricks Aiden had played before and then hand the collected evidence to my grandpa. I realized later. You two joined forces to deceive me. I said. That old man who cares so much about his face. How could he so easily agree to let me divorce Strong? The old man said he wanted to see how far you, who had already suffered a loss, could go. Trong protested his innocence. Then bit my earlobe warningly as if to vent his hatred. Don't move around. Your body can't take it. I snorted coldly, but still sensibly withdrew my hand. The old man only has you as a granddaughter. Aiden was originally paving the way for you, but no one expected his ambition to be so big. Trong rubbed my sore waist for me. He didn't expect you to prop up the Saria family either. As long as it wasn't snatched away by outsiders. I thought of my lack of talent in business and felt a bit guilty. Then I suddenly remembered something. What about your sister? I told you about my family situation before we got married. Trong was so angry that he used a bit more force with his hands, but still held back. I felt a bit guilty. After being reminded like this, I remembered that Trong had shown me his family photo before. He indeed had a very beautiful sister who had a car accident during a business trip and her life or death was uncertain. At that time, I was extremely resistant to Trong and didn't pay attention at all. So I leaned forward and kissed him. With a flattering tone. I was wrong. Don't be angry. Just as I was about to back away, I was pulled back by Trong. He kissed me thoroughly. She was saved. After losing her memory, she was taken abroad. Later, her husband died, and she inherited the family business of the other party. I only found out about it by chance in my previous life. Trong paused, then looked at me quietly. But at that time, you were already gone. I understood that Trong's gone didn't refer to the time when I just died. When could you see me? After avenging you and telling you at the grave. Trong lowered his head and played with my hand, smiling. When I came back, I found a little tail following me. I suddenly understood. No wonder I always felt that Trong had suddenly become coquettish at that time. Not only in his dressing. At first, I thought this guy had fallen in love with someone else. So you did it on purpose. I stopped talking and couldn't help but glare at Trong. Seeing that you were even jealous of the female secretary who has a husband. What else could I do? Trong chuckled. But the smile disappeared quickly. But if I knew you would disappear later, I'd rather you be jealous all the time. I was speechless. Finally, heading away, I could only awkwardly hug Trong's head to comfort him. Don't be sad. It's okay. I'm still here. As I said this, I couldn't help but feel sad. I thought about how sad Trong would be if he saw me disappear again. The atmosphere became warm. Until Trong clicked his tongue. You still need to rest for a couple more days. But you don't need male models. I'm enough. Your little body can't take any more. Trong. I should have sealed this guy's mouth. Trong said that the old man didn't want him to become the second Aiden. So he had to prove himself. And I also needed to grow up quickly when I was isolated and helpless. Besides, I also really wanted to know what you were really thinking. I was curious. But what if I actually don't like you and find someone else while you're away? Trong's face froze. Then he lowered his head and said casually. Then you won't be able to get out of bed. My waist was still sore. I was so angry that I bit him again. But that son of a bitch Aiden has become vigilant. He has handled everything cleanly later. Trong sneered, but his brows furrowed unconsciously. The evidence he gave to Grandpa before wasn't enough to completely ruin Aiden. And there was also a trap in the big project that Grandpa gave to Aiden later. But Aiden was too cautious and didn't fall into it. Actually, there's another way. I thought about it and honestly told Trong. Almost no one knew about Aiden's perverted infatuation with me. The only one who knew was Cynthia, who had been in cahoots with him from beginning to end. Trong obviously didn't know either. So after hearing this guy's face was tense. And he was exuding a terrifying aura of anger. You don't need to dirty your hands for this kind of scum. I quickly stopped Trong and kissed him again, vowing, what happened in the previous life will definitely not happen again. Trong let out an, I don't know if he listened. Originally, according to my plan, I only needed Trong to come back to me. Then the two of us wouldn't get divorced. Instead, we would show our love every day to stimulate Aiden. This was a plan I had made a long time ago. So what Ra was away. I endured the nausea and showed my dependence and affection for Aiden to stimulate his possessiveness. Trong came back. We didn't get divorced. And we showed our love. I also noticed that the morbid possessiveness in Aiden's eyes towards me was getting stronger and stronger. Just when I was waiting for Aiden to kidnap me so that I could use a set of women's self-defense techniques on him, Aiden was arrested. The charges were selling business secrets, money laundering, and attempted rape. The witness was Cynthia. Me? Since Cynthia went crazy and was sent to a mental hospital, I almost forgot about this person. He just went in like that? I turned to look at Trong. It's not just like that. But Aiden was disabled. And he's almost useless. He won't have a good life in there either. He corrected me. And a hint of disgust unconsciously showed in his brows and eyes. But Trong paused. And finally only said, "Fortunately, having fulfilledly." The old man said I passed. Later I found out that Aiden had been asking Cynthia to pretend to be me. Trong thought it would be too dirty for my ears. So he didn't tell me. It was really disgusting. And now, hearing this, I was unusually smart for once and subconsciously grabbed Trong's arm. I said nervously, "Do you have a handle in his hands?" I suddenly realized that with my grandpa's ability, it would be easy to deal with an Aiden. In the previous life, Aiden was able to seize power when grandpa was seriously ill. But this time, he didn't do anything and instead let Trong complete all this. But it clearly took Trong 3 years in the previous life. The panic in my heart grew bigger and bigger. I was so angry that my eyes turned red again. And my voice trembled. "You wouldn't really be so stupid as to do something illegal, would you, Trong? I'm telling you. What I said before about no divorce, only widowhood, was nonsense. If you really have an accident, I'll remarry with the child right away. How dare you wait?" Trong's tone was fierce. But soon his movements became stiff as he turned to look at me. "I have a child?" The delighted smile on his face grew bigger and bigger. And he looked a bit silly. I said, "Oh," and expressionlessly slapped his hand away. "No. I just said it casually. Maybe there is one?" Trong stubbornly stuck to my belly. "After all, your husband has been quite diligent these days." I sneered. "If there is, I'll abort it." So Trong sighed. "There is a handle in the old man's hands. But it's not something out of bounds or illegal. You have to understand him. His own adopted grandson, whom he raised with his own hands, could betray him. How about me, his grandson-in-law? He has to have something to feel at ease about." I didn't say anything. I knew all the reasons. But I still couldn't help feeling sad. Sad for Trong. I couldn't help but be in a daze. This guy couldn't be serious for more than 3 seconds. And his hands became dishonest again. I felt sorry for him. So I let him go this time. But I didn't expect Trong to go too far, coaxing me to call him a lot of messy names. I was really exhausted. But as soon as I closed my eyes, this guy leaned close to my ear pitifully and said, "I heard that you ran 800 meters during your period with a fever for Aiden and didn't even faint. Is this the same thing?" But this guy was extremely jealous. I was so angry that I gritted my teeth and endured it. I don't know when I fell asleep in the end. I only vaguely remembered that this guy suddenly asked me seriously, "Do you regret not taking revenge with your own hands?" I was so tossed by Trong that I closed my eyes and slapped him randomly. "What's the difference between you taking revenge for me?" Trong chuckled and lowered his head to kiss my face frantically. "Right. There's no difference. Good wife. One more time?" I woke up in Trong's arms. He held me very tightly, as if he was afraid that I would disappear if he let go. I couldn't help but glare at him a few more times. But then I laughed. So I snuggled closer to Trong. Before I could adjust my position to catch up on sleep, a lazy voice sounded above my head. "Wife. My brother is awake." I immediately put away my tender feelings and bit him on the chest as if to vent my anger. "Shut up and go to sleep." I shouldn't have had any expectations of this guy with a head full of dirty thoughts.